Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the community of practice today on this lovely sunny March day, although albeit it's a little chilly and windy. It is my pleasure to introduce Alec Jacobson from computer science, who's going to be presenting on role-playing and paper reading seminars. Professor Jacobson used a role-playing rotational format in his graduate computer science seminar, and he's going to be exploring both the benefits and the shortcomings of this teaching method. So I'm going to stop talking now and throw it over to Alec. Thanks so much for coming today.
Of course, thank you very much, Jessica, and thanks to the organizers for allowing me to come and talk today. I'm very excited about this format, and it's a great pleasure to talk to you about it today. So as Jessica said, I'm from computer science. Specifically, I work in computer graphics, and some of what I'll be talking about today will be specific to my experiences in that, but hopefully we'll see that it generalizes. So across graduate programs at basically any university, you'll see paper reading seminars. So these are very common, and they happen because we have specialized topics that don't necessarily have a specific textbook for them. So in these paper reading seminars, the students will read a series of academic papers published on that topic. Often these courses appear in our course listings as something like special topics or advances in theories of this kind of thing. As I said before, these exist often because we don't have standardized tests. So if we looked at our undergrad Intro to Algorithms class, there's a book literally called Introduction to Algorithms. We don't necessarily have that if we're looking at the progression of natural language processing in the last 2 years. So instead, the academic papers that have been published serve as the primary references for that topic. In addition to reading papers and presenting these papers, this is an opportunity for soft skills like technical reading, so sitting down and reading one paper in one sitting. Students also use these seminars as an opportunity to practice public presentation. And it's an opportunity for students to discuss with each other in a critical setting. Most of the time when we see paper reading seminars, oops, excuse me here. A bug from my slide, 1 second. Whoa, I'm using some fancy software. I might have to reboot it. Hold on just 1 second. Let me just set this, hopefully it doesn't crash. Sorry about that. Most of the time when we see paper reading seminars, the format that it's done in is what I'll call a one-to-many format. So the idea is that one student reads the paper for that week, or maybe everyone's assigned to read that paper, but one student is going to present it to the rest of the class. You can kind of imagine how this would play out. A student stands up in front of the slide deck and summarizes that paper to the rest of the class. This simple one-to-many format has a lot of practical advantages, clear division of student work. It also minimizes the organizational overhead for the instructor. So we can divide up the course schedule into a list of papers, and we have one student presentation per paper per week. A downside of this is that students are only really directly participating with the material and in the course when they're presenting. And this might only happen once or twice per term. So summarizing the paper in terms of this presentation is also a bit disappointing in terms of how much understanding there'll be. You can kind of think of it as like they're taking the paper and then translating it into a presentation. So this is, we might see this in like a Latin class. There's like draconian, just like translate this text and turn it into English text. This is missing out on an opportunity to engage more with the material that we have. Meanwhile, for the audience, it's really easy to disengage entirely, right? If I learn that I don't really need to read that paper to enjoy the presentation, then maybe I don't even read it before class as an audience member. Sometimes the instructors will try to mandate engagement through weekly quizzes or requiring students to ask questions, but even this doesn't necessarily work really well. Students can kind of figure out like, oh, we can get away with kind of vacuous questions that could apply to any paper without really reading it, like what are the other limitations of this paper or something like that. So this leads to a bit of a poor participation feedback loop that creates kind of a downward spiral that happens throughout the term. So as we get through the term, the presentations get worse, the audience participation gets worse, and to the very end, we just have very shallow presentations with maybe no or minimal questions from the audience. So as a best case scenario, the one-to-many format gives us a tour of a list of papers that we've presented, that we've picked ahead of time. This also misses out on some opportunities for that soft skill building. So the students are presenting the paper, maybe they do one or two oral presentations for the whole course, but they're doing this in a low stakes environment with very little feedback. This misses out on other opportunities like teaching students how to conduct a peer review, how to generate new research ideas based on a paper that they're reading. For computer science, a really important skill for graduate students is being able to rapidly replicate or implement or re-implement a paper that they're reading. We'd also like our graduate students to be able to assess the deployability of some idea into practice. So in computer science, this might be like, could you deploy this in industry and would it work? And then going beyond the technical contributions of the paper we're reading, we'd like our students to be able to assess the positive and negative social impacts of the science that they're reading. So it's generally assumed that our graduate students will somehow learn these skills at some point during their career before they graduate, but where exactly are they doing this? They're not doing it in an environment where they get lots of feedback or in particular, any sort of explicit guidance on how to do this. The traditional lecture and assignment-based courses, like the one-to-many seminars, don't explicitly provide opportunities to teach these skills. Okay, so in sort of response to these issues, the disappointing nature of the one-to-many seminar and the missed opportunities to teach these soft skills, we propose a many-to-many role-playing format. So in this format, all of the students collectively present the same paper that week. Each student reads the same paper as all the other students, but each takes on a different role for that particular week. The roles define the lens through which they read the paper and what they bring to the discussion. And students will cycle through different roles throughout the semester. This role-playing format deepens and maintains engagement and creates explicit opportunities for the soft skills that I mentioned before. So let me give you an example. So one of the roles that we have is a peer reviewer. So the student that's assigned to be a peer reviewer that week will complete a full conference style review of the paper that we're reading. And to the rest of the class, they'll justify their decision on whether to accept or reject that paper to some fictional conference. There are some positive side effects that we've noticed in this format, that it's not just rewarding for the students, but it's also very rewarding for the instructors. So in the one-to-many format, the instructor is kind of reduced to a validator or depositor of knowledge to the class. And I think this fits squarely into the banking model of education that reinforces the capitalist caste system of those who have something, have knowledge like the instructor, and those that don't, the students. Instead, in the many-to-many format, the instructor is sitting with the rest of the class in the room, and they're bringing their knowledge and expertise, and they're moderating the discussion. But in this way, they're a co-creator of knowledge with the students as the discussion progresses. So I'd like to give you a sense of the roles that we use for our particular instances of this. These are a bit tailored to computer science seminars, but I think in general, we can think about like, how would these create analogs to other disciplines? And some of them will generalize more straightforwardly than maybe to others. So the first that we saw was this scientific peer reviewer. So under this role, you are seeing the paper it hasn't actually been published yet. It's under submission to a conference, and you've been assigned as a peer reviewer. Your goal is to complete a full conference style review form. For my field of computer graphics, the main conference is ACM SIGGRAPH. So we actually give them the SIGGRAPH review form, and they have to fill out all of the forms there and decide whether or not they would vote to accept or reject the paper. And that's what they'll bring to the classroom discussion. The second role that we have is the archaeologist. So you found this paper buried in the desert, and you must determine the chronological context in which it sits. So find and report on one older paper that's cited in the paper that we're reading, and one newer paper that chronologically comes after it, which cites this paper. Report on those to the rest of the class. In the third role, you're an academic researcher. You're working on a new project in this area, and you must propose an imaginary follow-up work that's not just based on the paper that we're reading, but it's only possible due to the existence of the paper that we've read. As a kind of complement to this role, we have the industry practitioner. You work at a company of your choice, bring to the rest of the class a convincing pitch of why you should be paid to implement this paper at that company. Bring with you one positive and one negative social impact of the application that you're proposing. Okay, so this one is very particular to computer science. This is the hacker role. The hacker needs a demo of this paper as soon as possible. So implement some small part or a simplified version of the paper that we're reading. Maybe that means doing it on a small data set or on a toy version of the problem. In computer graphics, it's often like the technique is for 3D geometry, so do it on 2D geometry. And then bring your code and share a demo in front of the class. All right, the second to last role is one of my favorites. This is the private investigator. So you're a detective who's running background on the authors of this paper. Where did they work? What previous projects may have led to this project? What motivated them to decide to work on this problem? For this role, we encourage the students to actually email and make contact with the authors of the paper. And this had a wonderful side effect that we didn't really plan on, which is professors just kind of love giving advice. So the emails that they'd send back almost always had some kind of career advice, which the student really liked and would talk about like the old days or something like that. It was really a wonderful side effect of that particular role. The final role is one we worked on a little bit, which is the social impact assessor. So the first aspect of this role is identify how the paper has self-assessed its impact in the world. It's likely positive. Are there any additional positive social impacts of the paper that have been left out by the original text? And then what are the overlooked negative social impacts or possible negative social impacts of the paper? So these are the roles that we've used in the past offerings of this course. I'd like to give you a little bit, whoops, in a funny state again. Let's see if I can get out of this, or I need to deboot. Let me see. I need to reset, sorry about that. Just be a second. There we go. Yeah, great. Sorry about that. So those are the roles that we have in the course. Let me tell you how this actually plays out in the course that I taught at University of Toronto. I typically had between 10 to 20 students with the usual class period time once a week of 110 minutes. Usually I would assign 1 to 2 hackers. That's like kind of the most intensive role. So I tried to make sure that students only did this once throughout the term. And then we'd have 2 each of the slightly more intense roles like the researcher, the practitioner, private eye, and social impact assessor. And then the reviewer and archaeologist, these are useful roles to have that can kind of be used to pad up the rest of the class so that scheduling and maintaining that nice rotation through all the roles didn't become too much of a chore of like maintaining a crazy spreadsheet to try to make sure that we got everybody uniformly permuting through all these roles. To get the class going, in computer science, we do not have discussion-based courses very often. So it's kind of like confrontational, I think, for the students to be thrown into a big discussion. I found that it was really useful to have rapid fire class-wide icebreakers to just get everyone talking at the beginning. So typically before I assign the paper for the next week, I would say, all right, when you come in next week, we're all gonna think of a missing experiment that the paper could have included, or everybody come up with an alternative title for this paper, and we'll go through those at the beginning just to get everybody talking. Then the instructor's role in the class is to moderate this discussion by weaving through the different roles. And I tended to do this pretty much ad hoc based on what the students were bringing into the class. And sometimes the students would create this flow naturally. They'd say like, oh, actually that, had something to do with the previous paper that I read as an archaeologist. Like maybe I could talk about that now. So sometimes this happened naturally. Other times the instructor kind of keep things going along, knowing ahead of time what people might be able to bring. In my classes, I optionally allowed the students to have visual aids or slides. Graphics is, of course, very graphical, so we had this. To make sure that we still had a discussion, though, we'd use a shared slide deck that I would maintain from the front or from the side. And this way, people could talk in a round table discussion without actually leaving their seat. So we didn't have this like you go forward to the front of the class. In the virtual versions, this actually worked out really well. We just did Zoom and told everyone to be in gallery view. And this worked very nicely. So like the one-to-many format, this has the benefit or the quality that the workload for the instructor outside of the class is fairly minimal. What this really entailed was coming up with a list of papers, or rather a candidate list of papers, so that this could be evolved throughout the semester. The instructor should, of course, read the paper too. And then assigning this permutations of roles in a somewhat uniform way is a little bit tricky. You definitely need to have a spreadsheet that's handling this part of it. Overall, the students thoroughly enjoyed this many-to-many role-playing format. If I could read a few of the course comments that we got. And these are fairly typical, I would say. One student says, I really enjoyed the class. Taking it has given me more confidence when reading and implementing work from recent literature. Another student says, the environment of the seminar was comfortable and conducive to discussion and learning. One student says, the different roles taken gave us new perspectives on how to critically evaluate research. One more student says, the focus on self-guided learning was good and allowed for students to learn at their own pace. And finally, one student says, I really liked how this course was organized. The role-playing part is an excellent way of learning different aspects of literature review and how to write a good paper. As instructors, I really liked doing this course. When I taught the one-to-many seminars, I was happy when the term was done, and I really didn't look forward to the poor presentations by the end of the term, and it wasn't exciting to go to that. When I teach the role-playing format, I'm genuinely sad when the term is over, and I usually tell my students, I don't know if they believe me, but I'm like, I really miss out when the term is done. In the old version and in the new version, this is much more exciting as an instructor. So far, we've had 4 different offerings of this course at University of Toronto, and my colleague teaches one at University of North Carolina. We've learned a few things and have gone through some refinements. One thing that we tried at some point was allowing students to vote on a subset of papers from some giant list that we created at the beginning. While this felt really democratic, it led to a lot of duplications in the papers, and we find that it's better for the instructor to curate the list of papers and allow this to flow throughout the course. So often in my courses, I might say like, all right, like this paper that we've just read has influenced many different aspects of computer graphics. Would you all rather read about animation next or about geometric modeling? And so there can still be involvement in the students in picking those papers, but not predetermining that at the beginning of the class. We also, based on the feedback, learned from the students that while they like hearing each other speak, they don't want to miss out on the instructor's perspective and opinions on the papers. So we don't want to make it too egalitarian where we never talk, but students are really looking for that in addition to each other's peer feedback and peer discussion. One role that's been particularly difficult to refine throughout this process is the social impact assessor. In the past, we tried something that was like an ethicist from the future type role. This kind of led to a lot of students bringing in like unrealistic or like apocalypse Terminator type of scenarios for their negative impacts of the papers. Like it like went too far and became kind of a joke that we would do every paper and didn't really get to the heart of like looking at what are the actual real world impacts. I think that this got better with the social impact assessor, but still it's something that's very unusual for computer science classes to go beyond the technical subjects. One way that we tried to address this in my course is to have more exposure to talking about social impacts in the context of computer science. So in the last offering that I gave, the entire class throughout the semester read this book called Invisible Women, which has to do with data bias, specifically gender bias, and looks at a variety of information sciences and computer science topics. And then we had a special day at the end of the class where we discussed that book in a similar format as papers that we read. All right. So what I would love to hear from you, and I've been thinking about a lot because I love teaching this role-playing format for my grad teaching responsibilities, and I teach a more kind of traditional lecture and assignment-based class for my undergrad teaching, is how would we generalize this? In particular, how could we generalize this to large class sizes and to undergraduates? So I'm willing to admit that maybe the success of this format is completely due to selection bias to graduate students, where grad students come in expecting to take classes on one particular focus, and so they're really excited about that. What will we do for 100 students in a computer science undergraduate program or another program? In graduate school, marks are way less important than they would be for an undergraduate program. So what if we need accurate assessments for undergrad marks? How would we handle that in a participation-based class like this? There were variation in the final marks. You'd see that like the normal distribution, but they tended much more toward 100%. I'm also interested how this fits into the education literature. Colin and I wrote up a pedagogy report on this topic, and in doing so, we looked a bit into the literature. In particular, as I discussed before, there's a relationship to this concept of banking model of education versus co-creation of knowledge with students. We did find some others that had looked at role-playing. This paper from Parrott and Cherry discusses the advantages of explicitly assigning roles in discussions, and that seemed to work out well for them. They had very different roles in their paper, but there was something there that was related to what we were doing. And then, yeah, maybe finally, we put this report online. We've been delighted to see how much it's been picked up by various universities around the world, and it seems like it's gaining some momentum. So it's been really great to get feedback from other instructors and see how they're editing and changing this format. Yeah, so finally, I'd like to thank Professor Eitan Grinspan, who helped design this course for the first offering at Columbia, all the students that have taken this course, and I'd like to call out Jen and Jacqueline from the computer science department who gave me some feedback on this course idea. And finally, thank you, and thank you very much for allowing me to come here and talk.
Thank you so much. Alec, that was just fabulous. It was so, and I want to know what program you're using for your slides, because it's really cool.
Thanks. I'm sorry. Sad to see that it crashed a couple of times. This is a research prototype, so it doesn't actually exist in the world, but it's something that some collaborators and I are working on.
Great. Well, I see